Welcome back to the program. In case you're just joining us, it's still Moneyline with Nancy, your #1 business and financial program on television. And joining me right now are my guests. I have Dr. Shubham Chaudhuri, World Bank Nigeria's chief. He's here with me in the studio. Hello, Shubham. Good to see you.
Good morning, Nancy.
Good
to be here.
Good to have you too. Dr. Alex Sienaert, the lead economist for Nigeria, is also joining us, but he is joining us from Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. Hello, Alex, and good to see you this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Nancy. Good morning to your viewers. I wish I could be there in person.
Good morning to you, Alex. All right, let me get started with Shubham. How many of those reports have we done? Can you remember? I think
at least since June 2020, so 2 a year, so it's been at least 7 or 8 by now.
Yes, exactly. And for what makes this report different for you? I said it earlier on when I was introducing the program. I happened to anchor and moderate the NDU last Tuesday, and I said it at the venue that this report is launched twice a year, and when I was called to moderate this time around, I was like, oh, I wonder how the World Bank will be feeling, and even the IMF, because Ari also got my bullets that day in terms of both institutions have been on Nigeria in terms of embarking on bold reforms. So what makes this report different, which is titled Seizing the Opportunity? It is different from Nigeria's Choice. It is different from Business Unusual. It is different from the continuing urgency of Business Unusual. It's different from the COVID-19 report. It's different from Resilience Through Reforms and all of that. What makes this different?
Well, I think you pretty much said it with seeing the sequence of titles. Often that's actually my biggest contribution. I kind of brainstorm with the team on, how do we convey the essence of, the message that we hope to get across. I think over the last 3 years, the basic message has been, look, Nigeria has so much potential and has had that potential for a long time, but that potential has not been realized, not fully certainly. And in some ways that Nigeria has actually not only has that potential not been realized, things have been kind of sliding backwards. And we were getting increasingly concerned about that because the future of Nigeria is incredibly important, not just to the World Bank, because it's a critical part of our ability to kind of meet our global mission, but for the region, for the continent, and I would argue for the world itself. So what we've been saying is, look, Nigeria has so much potential, but to realize that potential, the government, the business, political, elites, and most importantly, the people of Nigeria have to grasp that potential and depart from business as usual way of doing things that have kept Nigeria in the past, I would say, certainly 3-4 decades from rising to its potential. So that was the message, saying, please, time for business unusual. And a big part of business unusual was finally dealing with these elephants in the room, what I think His Excellency Governor Soludo of Anambra used to call the unsustainables. One big unsustainable was the fuel subsidies. Fuel subsidies that were draining the budget and not really providing that direct impact for millions of Nigerians all around the country. Another unsustainable was this mismatch of different exchange rates, making it hard for businesses or even households to access. So that was our message, to deal business unusual, starting with dealing with these unsustainables. And what has changed just in the last month is that there was this very decisive, very bold first step taken by His Excellency the President on his very first day in office to signal what he intended to do and then to actually move forward with those bold decisions. So hence, now is the time for Nigeria to seize the opportunity to rise to its potential.
Okay, let me bring in Alex into this conversation, because Alex was the one that really did perhaps the heavy lifting of the presentation on June 27. Alex, can you please explain to our viewers, perhaps those that do not have the opportunity of reading this report and also saw your presentation, can you tell our viewers what seizing the opportunity means really in a nutshell? Let me give you about 2 minutes to do that. What is seizing the opportunity?
Thanks, Nancy. So, yes, I mean, as Shubham has alluded to, we at the World Bank have been advocating, for some time for taking some of these bold measures. And what seizing the opportunity really, in essence, is seeking to convey is that by having done these things, Nigeria is really potentially at an inflection point in its development path, where for a long time that has been essentially flat and has had some particularly concerning elements to it. Hence this increasing urgency in tone that stakeholders such as ourselves have been adopting. Now, this long-standing opportunity that the country has had, to bend that development path upwards, essentially economic growth, but not just growth for the sake of growth, growth that is sustainable, growth that is also sufficiently widely shared, and can really begin to lift opportunities and incomes, specifically for we at the bank are pretty focused on the bottom 40-50% of households in Nigeria. It's probably closer to 60% of households that are fairly close, to the national poverty line and even vulnerable to slipping below it. So it's a massive potential transition point, and we wanted to really recognize that in this edition. These are regular economic updates, and their job, of course, is just to take stock. Where do we find ourselves in the economy? What's our assessment of essentially what the performance has been over the last 6 months, and what is the outlook? And so we really wanted to acknowledge, something historic in terms of Nigeria's economic policy settings has been launched. Of course, saying all this, in a more forward-looking sense, the work is clearly not done. This sets the stage. One way of putting it maybe is that it's a necessary, not yet a sufficient condition for this kind of takeoff. And then we have a fair amount of focus around what some of the ideas and near-term continuing priorities would be, to really embed these steps that have been taken and to build on those and to extend those to move in this really new direction.
Okay, let me come back to Shubham. The first day in office, of course, May 29, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Nigeria's president, announced the fuel subsidy removal. How did the World Bank take it? Were you surprised at that announcement?
I would say not really, in the sense that had been clear. What he intended to do had been clear in the party platform and all of his statements. I think
the way it came up, I'm talking about the announcement.
Yes. So I think if you hear what he said, he did say that, look, there's no money in the budget. It has beyond the end of June. So as far as I'm concerned, he said, it's gone. I think and what did, perhaps in retrospect, should not have surprised us was the immediate reaction on the street. So once you say that, look, even if he intended to say, and I don't know that fuel subsidies are gone by the end of June, they'll be gone, the reaction on the street was they're gone as of this afternoon. And in that sense, and once that reaction has set in, you have to then take it as a reality and go with it. And so that was in fact confirmed 2 days later as NNPC raised the retail pump price of fuel, of PMS. And then the rest we know and what's happened in the last month. But it was not a surprise in the sense that His Excellency the President had been saying that throughout the campaign trail. In fact, all the candidates had said that, look, this is not something Nigeria can afford any longer, and so we need to deal with it, and we need to make sure that Nigeria, the people, benefit from the revenues that will be, we call them recovered revenues, revenues that should have been flowing into the Federation, but were not, because they were instead being diverted to
Okay.
fuel subsidies.
Still with you, Shubham, before I come back to Alex. When the government announced, of course, fuel subsidy removal, we also saw the government, through the Central Bank of Nigeria, announce an FX unification. You know, I asked that last Tuesday. I said, I don't even know what to call it, what term to call it. Is it depreciation? Is it devaluation? My guests, one of those, they said, okay, what we saw is staggered devaluation, unification, adjustment, flexibility. Which other word? But I came up with, they told me last Tuesday, Nancy is depreciation. But it now depends on who you're talking to, because they're like, no, in fact, Naira appreciated relative to the parallel market price. But what I'm trying to ask is there the pressure of what I call reforms overdose? Because it seems Nigerians were given 2 injections at the same time or perhaps we had 2 surgeries at the same time, let me put it that way, because we were internally hemorrhaging. This is more than injection. Nigerians are suffering the pressures of reform overdose. What do you think about that?
I think certainly it's a lot to deal with. You know, having the exchange rate reforms come at the same time as the fuel subsidy reforms. And I wish it weren't the case that these needed to be done in such quick succession, almost simultaneously. But the fact of the matter is that there really was no choice. I mean, when we talk about internal hemorrhaging, that's a metaphor that I've used. This was happening in multiple places. And so if you just dealt with it in one place, but not in the other place, then you would not have solved the problem. You would not have, you know, set in place the kind of the necessary conditions that Alex just talked about for the patient to fully recover, to be on a path towards full recovery. So even 3 years ago or 2 years ago, there would have been some more room for maneuver to kind of think about the sequencing, to space things out. But things had gotten to the point where these 2 unsustainables needed to be dealt with at the same time. And that's, I think, why the government and the central bank decided to do this. Now, this will mean pain, short term. You know, emergency surgery can be traumatic. You know, and I'm, you know, can't imagine what ordinary Nigerians who are seeing the cost of basic transport go up, triple overnight, seeing prices of other things then start to kind of come in this kind of domino effect. I can imagine what they're going through, and this is why we've been saying right from the beginning that, and this is also the international experience. This is not just my opinion. This is what in other countries that have undertaken these kinds of reforms, what the experience has been is, look, there is a way of at least alleviating the short-term pain. You don't always have the fiscal space to completely eliminate it, but you can at least alleviate it, bring it down a bit, cushion, provide some relief to help ordinary people deal with the effect of these reforms, which will primarily be in the short term. Okay? Because the whole justification.
What is short term? Because the other thing is that if the World Bank is saying it's short term, is near term, what is short term? Because before that short term expires, many people have been plunged into poverty.
Yes.
Some people may even die. So what is short term?
So short term, in the specific sense that one way of looking at it is, how long is this inflation spike going to last before it starts dissipating? So kind of the economy adjusts to this new reality. That's basically in the next 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
Okay. And your point about, you know, how can people get by during those 3 to 6 months? People will find that they can no longer meet their basic needs. Therefore, it's imperative, absolutely imperative, that the compensation, the measures to provide some relief be put in place as quickly as possible. But again, there's always a but. But in putting in place these measures, it's also important to ensure that they're done robustly. You know, to just say, oh, we will be providing cash relief to some segment of the population, but then to not have that cash actually reach the households, the people who need it, would be, you know, just kind of exacerbating the problem, and then would breed even more distrust. So this balancing of doing this as quickly as possible, but not so quickly that it's not done robustly. I think that, in essence, is where Nigeria is in right now. We're certainly here to support government in rolling this cash transfer out and these relief measures out as quickly as possible, as broadly as possible, as the government chooses to do. And as you know, we've had in place for over a year and a half now this $800 million to at least provide a base on which government can build.
Okay, let me bring in Alex now. Alex, from your presentation and from what Shubham has said, and I'll come back to Shubham in terms of the plans for the poor and vulnerable, just like I mentioned earlier, what's short term? Within 3 to 6 months, you will get a lot more people impoverished. For the first half of this year, you mentioned also in the report that 4 million Nigerians have been pushed into poverty from January till about May, June. Why was this the case? Why did 4 more million Nigerians, why were they pushed into poverty, bearing in mind that the last administration's promise to Nigerians was that he was going to lift 10 million people out of poverty? So if I put the 4 million, which you mentioned from January to June, and if there's no compensation, like Shubham has said, that we need a robust compensation, 7.1 million Nigerians will be additionally pushed into poverty. That's about 11 million this year. So why was that the case in the first half of this year?
Let me answer that in sort of two ways or at 2 levels. The first, maybe more conceptually, is that one of the challenges in the discipline of economics is, to understand what is you're in a particular situation and scenario. What does the alternative situation and scenario look like? And the numbers like the ones you've just mentioned of around 4 million Nigerians pushed into poverty in the first part of this year, and the prospect of many more as a result of some of these changes going forward. Those are clearly attention grabbing and concerning numbers. But I think the first thing to say is, what is the alternative? What would that have looked like? And in terms at least of the prospects for poverty alleviation over the next, short to medium term, those prospects are now dramatically better as a result of these policy steps. So we'll never know, we'll never be in that universe where nothing was done to be able to make concrete estimates. But I think we should be very clear that the path that Nigeria is now looking at is a much more positive one in terms of what is likely to happen with poverty. In terms of that backward-looking estimate, that should really be understood as effectively a mechanical estimate that's based on the fact that when we see the high rate of inflation that has been the case in Nigeria, that puts a huge amount of pressure just on ordinary Nigerians' purchasing power. How far does a given number of naira go, right? Does my paycheck last the week? And so all that estimate is we look at the consumption of the range of Nigerian households along the income spectrum. There is a cutoff point on that spectrum below which households are considered to be poor, right? Something like 50 or 60,000 naira per household. And if we see increasing prices result in a reduction of what households that are close to that level of consumption are actually able to afford, there's your estimate of X number of additional households falling into poverty. So it's a mechanical estimate, and we'll see to what extent it's borne out once we have actual household survey data. Unfortunately, of course, those always come with a big lag, which is why there's some value in doing the best we can to determine what those numbers look like more in real time. But it's a mechanical estimate, and as I say, going forward, um, the inflation impacts of the changes we've seen are going to be significant over the next couple of months. Hence the conversation around, what can be done to really support households to get through that. But then we're expecting the impact to be disinflationary, and that's the difference between the path Nigeria is now on and where it would otherwise have been, because this is obviously enormous fiscal savings, which means much reduced financing requirements for the government, and as a result, less recourse to debt, less high cost and inflationary financing, and just a better growth dynamic for the whole economy, which is going to be good for production and prices down the line.
Okay, Alex, let me still stick with you with inflation from the report, and I hope my team is listening. If we can get that part out, in fact, when I got to that point, what can 1,000 naira buy for you right now in Nigeria? So of April 2023, it can just buy 0.9 tuber, 1.8 loaves of bread, and 0.9 liter of kerosene. With especially your prediction that inflation will get to about 25% before it starts decelerating. What are the recommendations there in order to bring inflation down? Then the second question to you is also around debt service. Public debt service to GDP ratio is about 40% right now. And also in your report, you did mention that debt servicing has exceeded over 100% of our revenues. Despite the fuel subsidy removal, we've been promised about 3.9 trillion savings for this year. How do you think that gap can be plugged?
So inflation, maybe to stick with the medical analogy for a moment, is, it's quite symptomatic of what is the health of the economy, and what are some of the choices that the subject or the patient has made. And in the case of the Nigerian economy, there's a real mix of factors that have gone into this, and they range from particular measures that restrict the supply of certain products, and of course, when you do that, you increase the scarcity and therefore the price of those and related goods. And there are some examples of that. For example, the border closure measures that were implemented a few years back, and we saw very clearly that had an upward impact on prices. And there are still certain measures along those lines, such as restrictions on the use of foreign exchange for the importation of certain categories of products, that we think do increase, the cost structure of Nigeria's economy. So those are things that the government could look at. It's not to, underestimate, again, some of the challenges of making these adjustments and of sort of dislocations in doing this. But there are some very concrete measures that government could look at that would be good for starting to bring these price pressures down. But another big aspect of this, and I think it's a useful way of looking at it and thinking of it, is just, at a given time, you've got a certain productive capacity in your economy, and you've got a certain amount of currency in circulation and in the banking system and overall. So you've got a certain amount of increasing amount of naira chasing what the economy is able to produce and people are able to afford. And there's been huge pressure on that, stock of money in the economy, upward pressure in recent years, because of the very large financing requirements that have emerged for the government. Government has financed those in various ways, but one of the important ways has been through the use of financing from CBN, the Ways and Means advances. That's a stock that's risen to well over 20 trillion naira, and that places ultimately upward pressure on the money supply. And of course, has been related to the having to finance the very expensive PMS subsidy, which is now gone. So you can see the kind of circular dynamic that's been responsible for driving a lot of the inflation, and the fact that this is now that vicious cycle is kind of broken is what makes us pretty constructive, that, as Shubham mentioned, looking ahead 6 months or so into the early part of last year, sort of all else equal, we should start to see pretty considerable relief coming through there. I'll be brief in terms of the government's options to, finance the remaining gap that is there, given the fiscal situation. Really important question and key point, because in many ways, I think the headlines around the subsidy removal would kind of lead one to imagine that this means a big windfall, right, for the federation. But this is where the medical analogy is quite important. That this stops the hemorrhaging and bleeding of a situation that was going backwards, that was unsustainable to begin with. But there is still this significant fiscal deficit, even with this having been done. And it will require, a continued really strong focus on what government can control, which is careful ongoing control of the various kinds of expenditures, doing what can be done, and again, needs to be in a sort of structured way, but looking to grow this revenue base that government has, its share of the pie, so to speak, which is still very low in Nigeria. Even after these reforms, it will only get back up to about 8-9% of GDP. That's less than half of the African average. So there's still a long way to go there. And then, various ways to optimize financing, to seek whatever concessional external financing can come in. We at the World Bank would be working hard to do our part there, also from other sources, and just avoiding this reliance that's emerged over the last couple of years on the central bank financing, because that was never the intention of that facility, and it's expensive, and as I've outlined, it's really inflationary. So a big agenda.
So many things to ask, but we just have, let's continue till perhaps the next 10 minutes. Shubham, $800 million on the table for Nigeria. What is Nigeria really borrowing that money for? Is it really now for cash transfer alone? Because I tried to get clarity from Mr. Wale Edun last Tuesday. Someone actually also sent a question, because questions have started coming. Why is the World Bank not interested in channeling its $800 million financial interventions on revamping Nigeria's refining capacity rather than a palliative to indigent Nigerians? Because some people are saying, why 50 million Nigerians, why 10 million households, giving them a paltry sum? If you give me cash today, will you give me again tomorrow? Bearing in mind we don't also have a valid social or enough, let me not say valid, we have, but not so much of it. And how many of those funds that were even earmarked to vulnerable Nigerians, perhaps in COVID, got to them? Why is the World Bank not looking at something more sustainable than just cash, giving Nigerians cash? If you give me fish tomorrow, will you give me fish again the day after tomorrow?
Right. So, Nancy, let me say, I understand where this question is coming from, but part of what your audience, I hope many Nigerians need to know, is we have, over the last, all the years that we've been working to support Nigeria, in fact, it is all about not giving fish, but about helping Nigerians to fish for themselves, right? So most of the $10.5 billion that our board has approved since February 2020 has been towards things that are investing in the human capital of Nigerian families, children, youth, women, helping with electricity access. Electricity access being a way to unlock the productive potential of both Nigerian households, but also it's a form of investing in Nigeria's children, because they can now have access to light. Rural roads, again, helping farmers get their produce to market. So the bulk of our financing that we provide for Nigeria has in fact gone towards things that are meant to develop the potential of Nigeria, the productive potential of Nigeria's economy, but most importantly, its people. This $800 million, your question, what is it intended for? So when we present these kinds of programs to our board, we have to be very clear about what is the development aim of the program. What will this financing be used for? And when this was presented to our board back in December of 2021, the development aim, stated development aim, was that Nigeria is going through a period of economic kind of crisis or turmoil. Prices have been going up. And as a result of, and prices could go up even further, say, if fuel subsidies were removed. And as prices go up, households that are near the poverty line or even below the poverty line, or households that are economically insecure, will face hardships. And this is meant, this $800 million is a way of mitigating some of that hardship. Now, you might say, why is it important to provide these kinds of relief measures? One would just be it's the right thing to do, you know, when people are already on the verge and if they start falling back. But it's also the smart thing to do, because what the international experience shows is that when households are faced with these kinds of hard choices, you know, they can't put food on the table. They can no longer afford to send their kids to school. What do? They take their kids out of school. Okay, and that's like you're basically mortgaging your future in order to just get by now. So it's a smart thing to do for governments to try and help mitigate some of the trade-offs that households would otherwise have to make.
But in terms
Now, is it going to be enough?
Exactly.
Is it going to be enough? No.
And inflation, is there no concern that inflation would also erode the value of the cash transfers that will be given to them? Because if you give someone 20,000 naira today, what will 20,000 naira buy? I'm saying, for example.
But do keep in mind, so this is, are we saying $800 million is enough to kind of solve the problem? Absolutely not. And in fact, that's why part of what we've been trying to urge government partners, both at the federal and the state, saying, it actually, please do use some of your own resources as well to expand the reach of a program like this. But it's important that ultimately this is about helping households cope with the shock, immediate shock after surgery, after emergency surgery. In the long run, or even in the near term, meaning starting next year, or even starting now but will bear fruit in 6 months, 1 year, 2 year time, are the kinds of things that are real investments in infrastructure, in Nigeria's people, using funds, government revenues, using our concessional financing. In our pipeline right now, in terms of programs that government has asked us for, you know, requested our support on, include things that are about electricity, about rural roads, about keeping adolescent girls in school, about helping irrigation, realize some of the hydroelectric potential. So these are all there. I would say the main question for your audience would be, would you rather that Nigeria, that the World Bank not have put this $800 million to provide the temporary relief? And it's not, I use the word relief because it is, but it's also a way of kind of preserving the investments, thinking of enabling households to keep their kids in school. Now, 5,000 naira per month doesn't seem like a lot, but for a household that's living on 50, 60, 70, or even 80,000 naira per month, that additional 5,000 naira can help on the margin.
Okay.
Would love to see it more, but.
More. Okay, as we wind down, Alex, let me come to you. What are the policy recommendations that the World Bank is putting out there, especially to this new administration, even as we wait for the ministers to be announced and perhaps see some kind of work, because it seems that Bola Tinubu has announced these reforms or policies over those, as I put it earlier, but we're yet to see anything following it. So what are the policy recommendations moving forward, also dovetailing from what Shubham mentioned earlier, $800 million cash loan there, of course it's there, it was approved during Buhari's regime for this administration to ride on it. $800 million should be, with 750, a quick math should be about 600 billion naira. cash for us there. So what other policy recommendations, vis-a-vis also the FX reforms that we've seen? Naira for dollar scheme is over. We now have a unified exchange rate, as it were. Very quickly, in 2 minutes, Alex.
I'll do my best. Basically, I would say we have three buckets. We've alluded to all of them. The first bucket is around consolidating the measures on the FX, the exchange rate policy reform. That's obviously been really meaningful in terms of the impact it's had on the exchange rates and the changes we're seeing. But there is more that can be done there and should be around, just continuing to clearly communicate what the new approach is. There'll be operational issues, of course, that players in the market are confronting. So, that's a continuing sort of process of change management as things and the exchange rate does adjust. I mentioned the continuing restrictions on the use of foreign exchange for certain imports product categories. We're focused on that because that continues to potentially drive segmentation in the market, whereas the new approach is really to have one unified and maximally liquid market for FX. So that is an important one. Second bucket is around this focus on inflation. These are often interrelated. So looking at some of these restrictive measures that could be helpful for bedding down the exchange rate policy reform, we think will also be helpful for inflation. And then there's the broader monetary policy settings of the Central Bank of Nigeria, and taking a hard look at the overall mix of policies in such a way as to ensure that everything is kind of pulling in the same direction. And there things like revisiting the continued use of directed credits with often laudable intentions around fostering growth and so forth, but
Okay.
Again, just the cohesion with the goal of bringing down prices.
Okay.
Can be really looked at. And then finally, Nancy, the whole fiscal agenda, and part of that is how to spend better, the kinds of measures Shubham was mentioning, including support to households, and then otherwise consolidating and bringing these deficits down over time.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alex. Just as we close, Shubham, if you can, in 30 seconds before my director starts, speaking to me in my ears, is there an ongoing engagement with these current government officials on the $800 million and so some of the interventions you've just mentioned? Is there an existing one? Then how does the World Bank categorize Nigeria? Are we lower income country, or what exactly are we? Because there's a confusion. Are we also middle income, or is it upper, lower, or something? So very quickly.
So we have been engaged with the current government even prior to its taking office, just as a way that we do to offer our support, to offer our technical assessments, to offer suggestions about what they might consider. So, but a lot of these so far have obviously been at a more informal level because none of the ministers are in town.
Okay.
So we are very much waiting to see that and are ready to jump in and provide whatever support we can. Nigeria is a lower middle income country.
Okay.
Which is based on its
Lower
overall
middle income.
lower middle
income country. Okay. Okay. So I think that sorts that out.
All right.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Dr. Shubham Chaudhuri, the World Bank Country Director, as well as Dr. Alex Sienaert. He joined us from Nairobi, the capital of Kenya. Thank you very much, Alex, for joining us today. And it's a wrap from us today. Please join us again tomorrow for another edition of Moneyline with Nancy. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. Bye now.